Anne Percy is the Mainwaring Curator of Drawings at the Philadelphia Museum of Art in Philadelphia, and she received her degree, her PhD, from the Courtauld Institute in 1974. After working for 3 years as the art history editor for the Pennsylvania State University Press, she was appointed Assistant Curator of Drawings at the Philadelphia Museum of Art in 1972 and became curator in 1984. A small sampling of the exhibitions that she has organized and has prepared complementary publications for have been on subjects of Giovanni Benedetto Castiglione, master draftsman of the Italian Baroque. A scholar collects selections from the Anthony Morris Clark bequest, Bernardo Cavallino of Naples, Italian master drawings 1540 to the present, and most recently, Great and Mighty Things, outsider art from the Jill and Sheldon Bonovich collection, and that was in 2013. This afternoon, Anne will bring us to these American shores and present the research that she and Philadelphia's distinguished curator of prints, John Ittman, have compiled in her paper titled An Acquiring Mind, John S. Phillips, a 19th-Century Philadelphia Print Collector's Taste for Drawings. Please welcome Anne Percy.
Thank you, Inga. This talk was supposed to be a duet, not a solo. John Ittman sends his great regrets that he can't participate in this fabulous symposium, but he is still recovering from bypass surgery. A lot of the material in this lecture comes from John's extensive researches for his forthcoming book on Philadelphia's remarkable holdings of German Romantic prints, soon to come out. For my part, hats off to the Frick Collection and to the Morgan Library and Museum for organizing this truly wonderful occasion. The talks have been terrific. Everybody's learned a lot. Thank you. Most of the holdings of all master drawings at the Philadelphia Museum of Art owns today were actually assembled in the 19th century by two well-to-do Philadelphians. They were John Smith Phillips, born in 1800, and Matthew Carey Lee, that's L-E-A, born in 1823. Each of them willed his print and drawing collection not to the Philadelphia Museum, which in any case did not exist at the time of Phillips' death, but to the Pennsylvania, thank you.
Are you number one?
That's number one, yeah. But that wasn't working.
You're doing one or two? Can't hear them.
Should I try this one?
Yeah. Try that one.
Yeah. Okay, there's the Philadelphia Museum that didn't get the drawings in 1876. They left, both of them left their graphic arts collections to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, a smaller but older arts institution in the city, housed in this masterpiece of American high Victorian architecture designed by Frank Furness. Lee left more drawings to the Academy, but Phillips was by far the more important collector. By the time of his death in 1876, he had assembled the largest print collection in the United States, approximately 4,300 prints of both European and American schools, as well as more than 200 drawings. Here are examples of a print and a drawing from the Phillips collection, and since all the works in the museum are from the Phillips bequest via the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, there are no credit lines, but they're all from Philadelphia Museum, the drawings. Phillips was collecting from a widespread sources from at least as early as the mid-1840s, which is early for America, until just before he died. His holdings of drawings were vastly smaller than those of his prints, and his purchases of them probably secured in an ad hoc rather than a systematic fashion. However, he still ranks among this country's earliest notable collectors of drawings, along with James Bowdoin III, whose drawings are in the Bowdoin College Museum, John Whit Randall, both in Boston. His are at the Fog, Robert Gilmore Jr. in Baltimore, that collection dispersed, James Jackson Jarvis in Boston and Florence, and E.B. Crocker in Sacramento, where the drawings are still in Sacramento. These individuals were all acquiring more or less at the same time as Phillips, or even earlier. Not having the staff and resources to care properly for a large graphic arts holding, the Academy placed its prints and drawings on permanent loan, in quotation marks, to the Philadelphia Museum in 1956. The museum's annual report of 1957-58 noted that, quote, a start has been made toward a critical study of the old master drawings, and a number of scholars and connoisseurs such as Philip Pouncey, Janos Schultz, Bernice Davidson, Anthony Clark, and Richard Wonder have given us the benefit of their expert opinions. This trickle became a flood over the following decades, as seemingly every European and American old master drawing specialist has visited Philadelphia's collection. Discoveries are still to be made there, and scholarly attributions can be fought on the mat backs, as they still are. This does not speak well to our housekeeping, but it sure is useful, and we wouldn't dream of doing away with them. By the late 1970s, the Academy had decided to limit its holdings to American art, and its European drawings were acquired by the museum in 1984 and the huge European print collection in 1985, both with the aid of funds contributed by trustees Muriel and Philip Berman. This achievement established the essential character of the Philadelphia Museum's old master drawings holdings, which are strongest in 17th and 18th century material, and we've continued to add to that. John S. Phillips was born on February 23rd, 1800, on Philadelphia's historic Front Street. This is an 1807 map. The city was settled from the late 17th century to the late 19th century from east to west. The red part is the old part of the city that Phillips' family lived in. He was born in where the red dot is, right on the Delaware River, and has lived most of his early life in an enormous house at the corner of 11th and Spruce, which is the yellow dot. And in 1858, he bought his own house around the corner at 1022 Clinton Street. There's the architectural history grad student holding up the big 1022, so you can tell which house it is. And he lived there until his death, still there. Phillips' grandfather and father were extremely successful Philadelphia merchants and shippers, trading in the West Indies, the Mediterranean, and the Far East. They had financial interests in turnpikes, banks, and insurance companies, and land speculations in several states. John, the oldest of 10 children, was not destined to follow in their footsteps. His early business dealings got off to a bad start. He was partner in a sugar refinery established in the early 1820s that failed colossally in 1826. Around this time, he joined his brother-in-law in operating a cotton weaving mill located on Chester Creek in the manufacturing district of Rockdale, PA. This operated 200 power looms until it folded around 1840. Probably at his father's death in 1845, Phillips came into an inheritance and retired from business. From then on, much of his time was devoted to forming his enormous collection of prints and drawings. Phillips was described in old family recollections as very tall. He was 6'3", thin, and invariably dressed in such old-fashioned garb that he looked like a character out of a Dickens novel. He never married, although in the early 1840s, while renting a house at Rockdale, he unsuccessfully courted some local belles. Unfortunately, the ladies took a dim view of Phillips's eccentric garments and his free-thinking religious opinions. They really took against that. They called him an infidel. They found him way too talkative, full of learned discourses on subjects as diverse as botany, phrenology, embroidery, anatomy, poetry, and drawing. And I did not make that up. That's in Sophie DuPont's published diaries and letters that she was one of the people he was courting. Despite his lack of social skills and business savvy, Phillips was remarkably talented in scientific and mechanical things. He was a founding member in 1842 of Philadelphia's Franklin Institute for the Promotion of the Mechanic Arts, and he also belonged to its Academy of Natural Sciences, established in 1812. This would have brought him in touch with eminent naturalists in the city, such as Thomas Say, Titian Ramsay Peale, and Charles Lucien Bonaparte, well known for their studies of birds, insects, butterflies, and shells. Phillips himself was an amateur conchologist, or specialist in the shells of mollusks, and served from 1840 to 1843 as the Academy of Natural Sciences Curator of Conchology. At his death, he left his collection of 10,000 mollusk shells and his books on the subject to the Academy of Natural Sciences. It was his original intention that his prints and drawings should go there as well. Thank goodness that didn't happen. He changed his mind in 1874 in favor of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and all his art and the books related to it, as well as the paraphernalia for storing it, went there when he died 2 years later. The natural scientist has a predilection for gathering thousands of specimens of plants, minerals, fossils, insects, birds, shells, and so forth for study and classification. Perhaps this methodology had some role in Phillips' intensive efforts to acquire as many examples as possible of the schools, techniques, and processes of printmaking. When I came to work in the Philadelphia Museum in 1972, about a quarter of the old master drawings on deposit from the Pennsylvania Academy since 1956 had been removed from their former mounts, matted, and boxed. No one seemed to know much about how the Academy had come by these works, except that John S. Phillips had left the institution a large collection, primarily of prints. We had no clue as to the identity of the M.C. Lee, whose initials and last name were stamped on the spines of the 20 albums of drawings. That's the same album, it's just the M.C. Lee is clearer in the top shot. In the early 1990s, John Ittman and I began to tease out information on where these works had come from. Thanks to the Academy's archives, we quickly discovered that M.C. Lee was Matthew Carey Lee, a reclusive Philadelphia chemist, a generation younger than Phillips, who was from a literary and art collecting family, great importance in Philadelphia. At his death in 1897, Lee left somewhat over 2,000 Old Master and 19th century drawings to the Pennsylvania Academy, mostly housed in a variety of late 19th century albums similar to this one. However, there's little evidence that Lee was an avid art collector. He may merely have been responsible for mounting in albums the drawings that some other member of his family had acquired. But in trying to determine whether demounted works had belonged to Phillips or to Lee, we found the primary clues to be collector's marks and inscriptions on the works themselves or their mounts. We now feel that we've securely identified around 220 works that came from John S. Phillips among the approximately 2,500 sheets in the Academy collection. Quite a number of these were acquired by Phillips from two earlier collections. Phillips owned at least 63 sheets that had belonged to artist John Nagel, Philadelphia artist, who had risen from humble origins to become a central figure in Philadelphia's mid-19th century world of culture, society, and art politics, as well as one of the country's premier portrait painters, and this is his best-known work. Nagel had purchased most but not all of his drawings that are at the museum from the collection of an Irish painter, dealer, and writer on the arts named William Paulett Carey, who was in Philadelphia from around 1836 to 1838. Many were bought from the Philadelphia auction house of M. Thomas and Son at a sale of works from Carey's collection held on May 2nd and 3rd, 1838. Nagel inscribed the versos of the works he acquired in dark brown ink in a distinctive cursive hand with information about provenance, the artist to whom the drawings were attributed, and whether they came from William Paulett Carey or from other sources. Inscriptions on the verso of the Cambiaso drawing here tell us that Philadelphia mezzotin engraver and portrait painter John Sartain got the work in London and gave it to Nagel for Christmas in 1941, so he didn't get it from Carey. The long inscriptions an account of Cambiaso's life from Pilkington's Dictionary of Art. And then here comes some sheets owned by Nagel that he did get from Carey and that Phillips acquired. The Barocci drawing was attributed to Parmigianino by the 19th century collectors. I hope that the inscriptions can be read okay. The school of Veronese drawing on the left was called Veronese by the earlier collectors, and the Taddeo Zucchero was study for the Villa Farnese at Caprarola on the right was earlier given to Sebastiano del Piombo. This Peter de Grebber sheet was inscribed to Cornelius van Polenburg, despite de Grebber's barely visible monogram at bottom right. Unfortunately, we don't know how Phillips acquired this body of work that Nagel owned. Nagel's collection of oil paintings and choice engravings, quotations, was sold at the Pennsylvania Academy on March 31st, 1866, the year after the artist's death, and again by Thomas & Son auctioneers. Drawings are barely itemized in the sales catalog and are grouped in a few miscellaneous lots following the prints. We have no way of knowing at present whether or not Phillips bought his Nagel works at this sale or got them in some other way. But interestingly, Nagel left a statement of how important his collection of engravings was to him because he never got to Europe, and that was one of the main bodies of evidence for him of what was going on over there. The other major source of Phillips drawings from another collection that we can easily identify was a Dr. Barry Delaney, an Irish physician from Kilkenny, whose collection was sold at Sotheby's, London, on June 5th, 1872. Phillips bought at least 89 sheets from the Delaney sale, many of which have changed attribution in the 20th century. This Salviati drawing is a close copy of one of Lorenzo Ghiberti's quatrefoil bronze relief panels for the doors of the baptistry in Florence. It was attributed to Giorgio Vasari in the sale. The drawing that is possibly by Giovanni Francesco Grimaldi on the left, there's been a lot of argumentation about exactly who this drawing is by, was attributed to Lodovico Carracci in the sale. And the authorship of the Canini drawing, on the Canini drawing on the right, a fairly minor figure, which was formerly given to Palma Vecchia, was settled on the basis of a signed and almost identical Canini drawing at the Metropolitan Museum. Some works, however, have retained their 19th century attributions until the present day, these two. In most cases, Barry Delaney's cursive BD collector's mark appears on the verso of the sheets. Danielle Cantor recently found this verso inscription signed by Barry Delaney among the Phillips drawings, so we should be able to identify inscriptions in his hand on additional drawings. The BD has the red arrow, and I don't know if you can read his blown up inscription on the left that's actually signed. Another clue for identifying Phillips drawings in the Academy collection is his numbering system. Phillips numbered his drawings on the versos of their mounts in brown or red ink, written in a thin, spidery script, although if a drawing has been completely demounted, this evidence is lost. We find these numbers with numerous gaps and repetitions, and Danielle has done a great job of working with this to get this kind of figured out, from 2 to 155. There are a few outliers in the 400s and 500s, which we think is more likely to show that Phillips housed some of his drawings with his prints than that he owned over 500 drawings. So there should be more numbers in between. Phillips owned a large collection of auction catalogs and stock lists from the Leipzig print dealer Rudolf Weigel and its successor, C.G. Berner, dating between 1851 and 1873. Weigel was the major continental outfit for Old Master and contemporary prints and drawings in Phillips' collecting days and was one of his primary sources for acquisitions. Obviously, these catalogs were important to him as he had them bound in gilt-stamped red Morocco leather. Many pages have bidding notes in his handwriting. Thanks to John Ittman's extensive research in Weigel and Berner catalogs, some online, some are actually in Dusseldorf, we know quite a bit about how Phillips went about purchasing his works. The drawing on the right, attributed to Angelica Kaufmann or perhaps her husband Antonio Zucchi, it's really a fluid attribution, was bought at a Weigel sale in 1857, and the Cestaro on the left at one in 1867. The sheet by Ludwig Emil Grimm, and Phillips loved German late 18th and early 19th century material. That's one of the biggest parts of his print collection, the 8,500 prints assembled by Phillips in this field, which is what John's publishing the book on, are the largest such holdings in the country. And so he did get quite a number of what other people have called in their talks modern drawings from the Weigel and Berner sales. And the Grimm is from a Berner sale in 1872. So Phillips was buying up almost until the year he died. Annotated catalogs in Berner's archive show that Phillips submitted bids from America for many lots in these Leipzig sales. Sometimes Weigel sent pre-publication proofs of auction catalogs to give Phillips' bids time to arrive. The day after Phillips's funeral, an anonymous article was published in a Philadelphia newspaper entitled John S. Phillips, Interesting Reminiscences of His Career. This account claims that he visited a number of European countries in pursuit of his hobby, and there was scarcely an important sale on the continent at which he was not a significant bidder. Phillips is missing in the city directories for various years from the mid-1830s through the mid-1860s. He may have been in Europe on buying trips in some of these instances. At other times, his assistant or curator, Henry Whipple, represented him at sales abroad. He also used agents in Europe. An annotated 1873 Leipzig catalog shows that he had 2 agents bidding for him at that sale. And an American expatriate painter and printmaker named John Gadsby Chapman sought out print bargains for him in Rome, as we know from letters written by Chapman in the 1850s. And a lot of this material that we have used is in the Pennsylvania Academy's archives, which are quite good. These are 4 drawings that came from one sale in 1877. I forgot to turn the slide. That are indicative of Phillips's quality of collecting in 19th century German drawings. Phillips seems to have begun having a list of his drawings compiled just before his death. The property register for 1876 in the Pennsylvania Academy's archives contains 2 handwritten lists of his drawings. The first was drawn up on March 22nd, 1876, just 2 days before the collector's death, and itemizes 80 works. The second was drawn up on March 27th, 3 days after his death, and lists 50 works. Although many attributions have changed, all but about 15 of these 130 sheets can be matched up with drawings today at the Philadelphia Museum, often because a Phillips number on a mount corresponds to a number on one of the 2 handwritten lists. And these, both the count of drawings of various schools and the lists, show us that predominantly Italian was the collection. Over half of the drawings listed are by Italian artists, and over half of the drawings that we've identified are Italian. The Creti on the left, standing for those, a French drawing. The other schools that are the most, the rest are divided between a French, British, Dutch, Flemish, German, and Spanish masters, and there are a number listed as anonymous. Phillips and Whipple obviously cared a great deal about provenance, as did Carey Nagel and Delaney before them, as information on earlier collections is included for most of the drawings on the list. These are mainly British collections familiar to old master drawing specialists such as Jonathan Richardson, Sr., Nathaniel Hone, John Barnard, Sir Joshua Reynolds, and Benjamin West. One has the feeling that the emphasis on distinguished provenances may have been invoked to shore up wobbly attributions to major artists in the old master drawing field. And indeed, a number of works on the 1876 lists have been demoted to the status of copies, studio of, school of, or unattributable. Among the many reattributions, a Leonardo da Vinci has now become a Battista Franco, and the red hour is pointing to a Phillips number, which is blown up down below, and the Nagel's inscription on the back of the sheet is, I hope, readable. a Federico Zucchero, the drawing on the left, is now Raffaellino di Reggio, and a Michelangelo is now a Parmigianino, the red chalk drawing on the right. The correct attribution to the Parmigianino was made in the 1950s and 60s by Philip Pouncey, Conrad Obhuber, and A.E. Popham. And the little inscriptions on the bottom are details from now detached early mounts that are in the object files. Then this Antonio Molinari drawing was attributed to Titian by Carey, Nagel, and Phillips. The Phillips number, again, with the red arrow pointing to it. All told, not many of the overly optimistic attributions on the two lists, which probably itemize about half of Phillips' drawings, have survived from the 19th to the early 20th century. On the other hand, many works do retain their 19th century attributions. These two, Giovanni and Ciro Ferri, and the Bernini, and which has been demoted to school occasionally, but now seems to be thought autograph, and the Lanfranco. And I didn't go into Phillips' method of storage, but I will quickly do it. I didn't want to go over the time. He and Whipple created these remarkable inventive system of storing drawings where they put the pages together of albums with screws that you could then take out, and if they bought more stuff or if something changed, they could insert other material into the albums. And the other talks have talked so much about portfolios and albums and what's the best way to keep drawings so they can be compared or safe and whatnot. Unfortunately, the Pennsylvania Academy, about 1913 or 14, after the drawing collection had gone there, took these apart, and we no longer have the ingenious storage albums of Phillips and Whipple. It would be nice to know what they were actually look like. America does not have the long, rich history of connoisseurship and collecting of old master drawings that's found in Europe and the British Isles. We can claim no Mariettes. A brief acquaintance with the few Americans mentioned at the beginning of this talk who seriously pursued this field before and during John Phillips's day, Baudouin, Randall, Gilmore, Jarvis, and Crocker, suggests that some common patterns of collecting can be found among these early drawing aficionados in the United States. Most of them were inspired to collect through trips to Europe. Sometimes they bought en bloc, and often what they bought was of secondary quality. They had to educate themselves about the field through dictionaries of art reference books, sales catalogs, and so forth. Because they didn't have the opportunities or resources to become expert in recognizing numerous draftsmen's hands, they had little means of affirming attributions. They relied on previous attributions, which were often overly optimistic, and many have changed in the light of later scholarship. And interestingly, over and over again, as gentlemen amateurs, they turn out to be as active in studying and collecting some branch of the natural sciences as they were in pursuing the graphic arts.